And for the honeymoon, Olivia declared, her voice cutting through the low hum of the upscale Italian restaurant. We've settled on the Maldives. Mark found this incredible all-inclusive resort with overwater bungalows. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience, you know. She beamed, looking first at our mother, who was practically vibrating with vicarious excitement. And then she turned that brilliant entitled smile on me. It comes to about $32,000 for the premium package, so we were thinking since you've been saving so diligently for that house deposit, you could just give it to us for this. It would be the most perfect wedding gift, and it solves our little cash flow problem in one go. The words landed on the pristine white tablecloth between us, casual, effortless, and utterly monstrous. The air in my lungs turned to ice. She wasn't asking. She was informing me of a decision she had already made about my money, my future, and my life. It was a simple transaction in her mind, the final and most audacious withdrawal from an account I hadn't realized was still open, an account built on a lifetime of suppressed hurt and quiet sacrifice. Before continuing the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers to be able to bring you stories like this every day. For you, it's just a click, but for me, it means a lot. That silence in the restaurant wasn't new. It was a language I had learned in childhood, the native tongue of the family dynamic my parents had so carefully constructed. The universe of our family had two celestial bodies, and one was a sun, while the other was a moon. Olivia was the sun, a dazzling star whose brilliance was an accepted fact, a natural phenomenon to be admired, celebrated, and orbited. For her, there were no expenses, only investments in her happiness. New ballet costumes, professional coaching for the cheerleading squad, a brand new convertible the moment she turned 16. These were not indulgences but necessities required to maintain her shine. I was the moon, sensible and steady, expected to reflect her light and, more importantly, to have no needs of my own that might cause a gravitational disruption. I was the responsible one, the practical one, the one who understood. That understanding was a cage built of praise. The pattern was set before I could even spell the word injustice, but the memory that forged it into the bars of that cage came when I was 10 years old. I had wanted a telescope, a Celestron Power Seeker 127 EQ for $179.99. I had the page from the catalog taped to my wall. For 8 months, I funneled every ounce of my being into earning that money. I mowed lawns, I pulled weeds for neighbors, I saved every dollar of my allowance, I hoarded birthday money. My savings lived in a large glass pickle jar, and I would spend hours counting the wrinkled bills and heavy coins, charting my progress on a piece of graph paper. It was more than a telescope. It was the first major thing I had ever worked for entirely on my own. It was proof of my discipline. Then, 2 weeks before I reached my goal, Olivia decided she needed to attend a prestigious summer gymnastics camp. It cost $500, and my parents, having just paid for a major re-landscaping of the front yard, were short. That evening, my mother sat on the edge of my bed, her hand cool on my forehead. "Chloe, honey, you're so good with money," she'd started, her voice a gentle poison. "And you're so understanding. This is a really big deal for your sister. It's an opportunity that won't come again." I didn't have to agree. The decision had already been made. My father took the jar from my dresser, and I watched him count out my crumpled bills and tarnished quarters on the kitchen table. $164.52. They promised they'd pay me back, but they never did. The gymnastics camp came and went, forgotten within a month. I never got the telescope. What I got, instead, was a lesson, learned with the brutal clarity of childhood disappointment. My work, my dreams, my savings were not truly my own. They were a family resource, a contingency fund for Olivia's whims. Looking at her across the restaurant table 20 years later, as she casually laid claim to $32,000 I had bled for, I saw the exact same placid, unthinking certainty she'd had as a 12-year-old. It was the look of someone who had never once had to consider that the things she wanted were built on the foundations of someone else's broken dreams. The telescope wasn't an isolated incident, it was the blueprint. As we grew older, the scale of the sacrifices simply inflated with our age. The most glaring example arrived on Olivia's 16th birthday, when a brand new, sunshine yellow Volkswagen Beetle, complete with a massive red bow, appeared in our driveway. My parents beamed, proclaiming it a necessity for her busy social and academic life. That car cost them just over $22,000, a figure I knew because the sticker was still on the window when she took me for a reluctant first drive. 18 months later, when I got my license, I was given a handshake and a hearty, "We know you'll be responsible." I spent 2 summers scooping ice cream and folding sweaters at the mall to save up $800 for a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and a heater that only worked intermittently. While Olivia zipped around in her climate-controlled bubble, I learned basic car maintenance out of necessity, my knuckles perpetually scraped from trying to fix whatever new rattle had developed. The real chasm, however, opened up when it came to college. Olivia, having decided she was a sculptor, was accepted into a prestigious private art school in New York City. The tuition was a staggering $50,000 a year. My parents didn't blink. They cashed in bonds and remortgaged the house, calling it an investment in her soul. Her 4 years of education, totaling over $200,000, were a testament to her creative spirit, a source of immense family pride. For her, they would spare no expense. When my turn came, I was accepted to the State University's business school, a solid and practical choice. The conversation was very different. "It's wonderful you got that Dean's scholarship, Chloe," my father said, patting my shoulder. "You've always been so self-sufficient." Their financial contribution to my education was exactly zero. I covered the gap with academic scholarships, another partial grant, and eventually $25,000 in student loans. I worked 30 hours a week as a math tutor and a library assistant. My life a carefully balanced ledger of credits, debits, and caffeine. The summer Olivia spent in Florence on a university-sponsored artistic immersion trip, fully funded by my parents. I spent working a double-shift internship at an accounting firm, eating instant noodles in my tiny dorm room. Each financial slight was framed as a compliment to me, my independence, my practicality, my sensibility. But I knew the truth. They weren't praising my strength, they were justifying their neglect. They invested in Olivia's dreams. I was expected to finance my own reality. It was a long, exhausting education in my own perceived value within the family. A lesson that had culminated in this very moment, with my sister seeing my $32,000 not as the foundation of my future, but as just another readily available subsidy for hers. The divergence of our paths after college was as predictable as it was profound. Olivia, armed with her expensive art degree, drifted into the nebulous world of the gig economy, eventually branding herself a lifestyle curator and brand influencer. It was a career that existed primarily on Instagram, a curated feed of borrowed designer clothes, artfully arranged brunches, and sponsored trips to boutique hotels. To my parents, it was the pinnacle of modern success. They would proudly show their friends Olivia's latest post, boasting about the amazing brands she was working with, blind to the fact that her compensation was often just free products and that her actual income was a sporadic and meager trickle. She was living a life that looked fabulous from the outside, but was financially built on sand, a reality my parents either couldn't see or chose to ignore. My path was deliberately, almost defiantly, different. I had emerged from State University with my accounting degree and $25,000 in debt, and I went to work with the grim determination of someone who never wanted to be financially vulnerable again. I became a certified public accountant, disappearing into a world of spreadsheets, quarterly reports, and tax law that my family found hopelessly dull. My professional achievements were invisible to them. When I passed the grueling, four-part CPA exam on my first try, my mother's response was a distracted, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Did you see the photos from Olivia's trip to Miami?" When I was promoted to senior associate at my firm, a position that came with a salary of $115,000 a year, they barely registered it. To them, my job was a boring, incomprehensible utility. But for me and my fiancé, Liam, it was the engine of our future. We lived modestly, a stark contrast to Olivia's performative glamour. I still drove my paid-off Honda Civic. We cooked at home, we took camping trips instead of flying to resorts, and we funneled every spare dollar into one single, sacred fund. It was our house deposit account. That $32,000 Olivia so casually demanded wasn't just a number in a bank account. It was the physical manifestation of 4 years of relentless work and disciplined sacrifice. It was every 60-hour work week during tax season. Every weekend I spent studying instead of socializing. Every fancy dinner Liam and I skipped. Every vacation we postponed. It was a fortress of security we were building brick by painstaking brick, a foundation for a life of stability I had always craved and never had. My family saw my sensible car and my modest apartment not as the tools of a long-term strategy, but as proof that I had a vast, unutilized surplus of cash just sitting around. They saw my six-figure salary not as something I had earned, but as a family resource they had simply not yet tapped. In their eyes, I wasn't building a life. I was just hoarding money that could be better spent on something truly important, like Olivia's perfect honeymoon. The two men at that dinner table represented the two poles of my existence. On my side, gripping my hand under the table in a silent, reassuring squeeze, was Liam. We had met 4 years ago, not through some glamorous social event, but at a dry, practical tax seminar for small business owners. He was a structural engineer, a man who believed in solid foundations, clear blueprints, and the unwavering logic of physics. He saw the world in terms of stress loads and support beams, and he applied that same sensible clarity to our life together. From the very beginning, he saw me. He didn't just see the quiet, responsible daughter. He saw the sharp-witted professional who could navigate a 1,000-page tax code, the disciplined saver who could turn a modest starting salary into a formidable financial asset. The first time he came to a family dinner, he sat through an hour of Olivia's dramatic retelling of a minor workplace inconvenience, all while my parents hung on her every word. Later that night, he'd turned to me and said, "It must be exhausting, constantly having the oxygen sucked out of the room like that. I don't know how you do it." It was the first time anyone had ever acknowledged the emotional labor of just existing in my own family. He was a partner in every sense of the word. The house fund wasn't my project, it was ours. He contributed equally, celebrated every $1,000 milestone with me, and shared the same vision of a quiet life built on our own hard work. He was the one who saw the danger my family posed to our future long before I was willing to admit it, his quiet wariness a constant, unspoken shield around me. Then there was Mark, Olivia's fiancé. He was Liam's polar opposite, a man built of surface and shine. He worked in some vaguely defined role in wealth management, wore a watch that cost more than my first car, and spoke in a language of brand names and exclusive vacation spots. He was utterly charming in the way a predator is charming, his smile perfectly calibrated, and his compliments smooth and practiced. He was the ultimate enabler of Olivia's entitlement, because he shared it. To him, life was not something you built, but something you acquired. He saw Olivia as another beautiful acquisition, and he saw my family, with me as its only financially solvent member, as a resource to be leveraged. I'll never forget the time he tried to give me investment advice at a family barbecue, talking down to me about high-risk, high-reward crypto schemes. "You accountants are too conservative, Chloe," he'd said with a patronizing smirk. You've got to make your money work for you. He had no idea he was talking to a CPA who specialized in forensic accounting, someone who could have taken his flimsy portfolio apart in under 5 minutes. He didn't see a professional. He saw a piggy bank. Sitting at that dinner table, I could feel Liam's solid, grounding presence beside me and see Mark's smug, encouraging nod across from me as Olivia made her audacious demand. Mark wasn't just supporting his fiancé, he was endorsing a business transaction. He was the architect of this very moment, and I knew, with chilling certainty, that he had looked at the life Liam and I were painstakingly building and had seen nothing but a convenient source of funding for his and Olivia's next great adventure. The engagement was announced 3 months before the disastrous dinner at my parents' anniversary party. It was, of course, a production. Mark didn't just propose, he orchestrated a moment. He had a string quartet hired for the party suddenly switch from Vivaldi to Olivia's favorite pop song. He got down on one knee in the center of the manicured lawn and presented a ring with a diamond so large and ostentatious it looked like a shard of ice on her delicate hand. My mother shrieked with a sound of pure, unadulterated ecstasy I hadn't heard since Olivia was crowned prom queen. My father wept openly. It was a scene of such cinematic perfection that it felt entirely unreal. The ring, I later found out from my mother's proud gossiping, was a 3-carat cushion cut, valued at over $40,000. It was a statement, a declaration of the kind of life Olivia and Mark intended to lead, and my family was utterly intoxicated by it. For me, seeing that ring wasn't a moment of joy. It was a blaring alarm bell. It was a financial liability masquerading as a romantic gesture. The unspoken expectations began that very night. As I went to congratulate my sister, my mother pulled me into a tight hug, whispering conspiratorially in my ear, "You'll be the maid of honor, of course. You'll have to plan the most incredible bridal shower and bachelorette party. Don't worry about the cost, honey. We know you'll want to do something really special for her." The assumption was already there. My role was not just honorary, it was financial. The pressure mounted with insidious casualness over the following weeks. It was never a direct request, but a series of assumptions dropped into phone calls and text messages. "I was thinking Las Vegas for the bachelorette," Olivia texted me one afternoon, accompanied by a link to a penthouse suite at the Bellagio that cost $3,000 a night. "Just for the 5 of us for a long weekend. You can handle the booking, right?" A week later, it was the bridesmaids' dresses. She sent a link to a designer gown that cost $800 per dress. "Since there are 4 other bridesmaids and I know their finances are tight," she wrote, "I told them not to worry, that my amazing, successful sister would be covering the dresses as her gift to us all." I was never asked. I was informed. Each assumption was a test, a probe to see how far they could push. When I offered a mild protest, suggesting a more affordable dress, my mother called me. "Chloe, don't be difficult," she'd said, her voice laced with disappointment. "This is your sister's one special day. You're in a position to help. Don't you want to see her happy?" Every conversation was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, painting my financial prudence as a character flaw, a sign of my selfishness and lack of love for my sister. The wedding was no longer Olivia and Mark's celebration. It was a vast, glittering project, and I was being positioned as the primary non-equity investor, expected to provide unlimited capital with no say in the budget, and no expectation of a return. The weight of it all was suffocating, a slow-motion car crash I could see coming but felt powerless to stop. The moment the engagement became official, the wedding ceased to be a future event and became a present and all-consuming crisis. It started with the bridesmaids' dresses, a battle I lost before I even knew we were at war. After my token protest, I quietly transferred the $4,000 to the designer boutique, a sum that felt both obscene and, terrifyingly, like just the opening bid. Olivia didn't even say thank you. She just sent a confirmation text. Got it. Knew I could count on you. The next demand came less than a month later, this time in a frantic three-way call with Olivia and my mother. They had found the perfect venue, a sprawling historic mansion with manicured gardens an hour outside the city. It was, according to Olivia, an absolute dream. But there was a problem. Another couple was looking at their desired date, and they needed to put down a non-refundable $10,000 deposit by the end of the day to secure it. Mark's money is tied up in a short-term investment, Olivia said, her voice a high-pitched performance of panic. Chloe, you're the only one who can do this. It's just a deposit. We'll pay you back. My mother chimed in, her tone a mixture of steel and syrup. Your sister is under so much pressure, Chloe. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. It's family. You have the savings. We all know you do. I felt my throat tighten. This was a direct assault on the house fund. I hesitated, trying to form the word no, but the combined force of my sister's manufactured hysteria and my mother's emotional blackmail was a tidal wave I had not yet learned how to withstand. My hands were shaking as I logged into my online banking, looking at the account Liam and I had so carefully nurtured. With a sickening lurch in my stomach, I initiated the wire transfer, feeling as though I was handing over a piece of my own future. Then came the invitations. They were ludicrously ornate, thick cardstock with letterpress printing, gold foil accents, and a custom wax seal of Olivia and Mark's initials. Each one was nestled in a silk-lined box. The invoice for $3,500 was forwarded to my email directly from the stationer with a one-line message from Olivia. Handle this PLS. By then, I had already bled $17,500 for this wedding, nearly half the value of my used car, a significant portion of my student loans, and a gaping wound in the heart of my and Liam's dream. Each request was a deliberate escalation, a test of my boundaries that I kept failing. I was no longer just the maid of honor. I was the unwilling and uncredited underwriter for a production I had no part in creating, and the weight of their expectations was crushing me. Amidst the relentless barrage of invoices and entitled demands, an email arrived that cut through the noise like a beam of pure sunlight. It was from our mortgage broker, and the subject line was simple: Congratulations. We had been officially pre-approved for a loan that put our dream within reach. For the first time in months, the chaos of Olivia's wedding receded, replaced by a surge of profound, private joy. That weekend, Liam and I shut off our phones and went house hunting, not with the frantic energy of Olivia's planning, but with the quiet, focused purpose of two people building a life together. We weren't looking for a palace to impress others. We were looking for a home. We found it on a quiet, tree-lined street, in a neighborhood known for its solid, unpretentious houses. It was a 1940s craftsman bungalow, painted a gentle sage green with a deep front porch and a sturdy oak door. It wasn't perfect. The kitchen needed updating and the backyard was overgrown, but it was honest. It had good bones, a wood-burning fireplace, and a small, sunny room off the kitchen that Liam immediately claimed for his home office. Walking through its rooms, holding hands, we could feel the shape of our future taking form within those walls. It was in that moment that the $32,000 in our savings account transformed from an abstract figure into a physical reality. It was no longer just a number on a screen. It was this house. It was the refinished hardwood floors, paid for by the 2 years we didn't take a real vacation. It was the bright, south-facing bay window in the living room, purchased with every Friday night we stayed in and cooked instead of going out to dinner. It was the solid roof over our heads, earned by the 4 years I drove my old Honda, while Olivia leased a new car every 2. That money was a mosaic of our discipline, a testament to our partnership. It was every overtime hour, every skipped luxury, every careful line item in our budget. It represented a quiet, shared promise we had made to each other to build something real, something lasting, something that was entirely ours. This wasn't borrowed glamour or performative wealth. It was earned sanctuary. As we stood on the porch of what we knew would be our home, a fierce, protective feeling washed over me. We had built this. We had sacrificed for this. This tangible future, this life we were building with our own hands, was everything. And the thought that anyone could see it as a mere slush fund for a fleeting luxury was not just insulting, it was a violation. And so we came full circle, back to that pristine white tablecloth in the Italian restaurant, the air thick with the scent of garlic and entitlement. We were ostensibly there to celebrate the wedding being just around the corner. My father had ordered a ridiculously expensive bottle of Barolo, and Olivia was holding court, her voice a theatrical melody that easily carried over the clinking of cutlery from nearby tables. Liam's hand was a warm, solid weight on my thigh beneath the table, a silent anchor in the churning sea of my family. Olivia had just finished a dramatic monologue about the seating chart fiasco when she clapped her hands together, her new diamonds scattering the candlelight. "Okay, final big piece of the puzzle," she announced to the table at large. "The honeymoon." My mother leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Oh, where did you two finally decide?" Mark, looking smug and proprietary, draped an arm around Olivia's shoulder. "I told her we're not skimping. You only get one honeymoon. It has to be epic." Olivia beamed at him, then turned that brilliant, weaponized smile on the rest of us. "And for the honeymoon," she declared, "we've settled on the Maldives. Mark found this incredible all-inclusive resort with overwater bungalows. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience, you know?" She paused for effect, letting the glamour of the words sink in. My mother sighed contentedly. Then Olivia's gaze shifted, landing directly on me with the focused intensity of a sniper. "It comes to about $32,000 for the premium package." The number hung in the air, obscene and specific. "So," she continued, her tone so light and reasonable it was dizzying, "we were thinking, since you've been saving so diligently for that house deposit, you could just give it to us for this. It would be the most perfect wedding gift, and it solves our little cash flow problem in one go." My mother jumped in before the silence could even curdle. "Olivia, that is a brilliant idea," she chirped, clapping her hands together softly. "Chloe, isn't that perfect? We all know how responsible you are. It's just wonderful that you can do something this meaningful for your sister on her special day." My father nodded sagely, raising his wine glass. "That's my girls, always looking out for each other." Across the table, Mark leaned back, a lazy, satisfied smirk on his face. He didn't say a word, he just gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was the nod of a man whose calculations had just proven correct. In that moment, surrounded by the murmur of other people's pleasant evenings, I felt a hot, prickling wave of humiliation crawl up my neck. They had choreographed this. This wasn't a spontaneous thought. It was an ambush. They had sat me down in a public place, flanked me with my parents, and made a demand they knew I couldn't refuse without causing a scene. They weren't asking for a gift. They were publicly levying a tax on my success, on my discipline, on the very qualities they had always pretended to admire. And they did it with the casual certainty of people who had been taking from me my entire life, fully expecting me to hand over the keys to my dream house as if it were a party favor. The world didn't shrink. It sharpened. For a long, suspended moment, the background noise of the restaurant, the distant laughter, the clink of a fork against a plate, faded into a dull, featureless hum. All that remained were the four faces staring at me, their expressions a grotesque tableau of expectation. Olivia's bright, demanding smile, my mother's eager, nodding encouragement, my father's benign, clueless approval, and Mark's predatory, confident smirk. They were a panel of judges who had already delivered their verdict, waiting only for my compliance. There was no surge of hot, furious anger. I had been expecting that feeling for weeks, a great cleansing fire that would burn away the injustice. But it never came. Instead, a profound and unnerving calm washed over me, a cold wave that extinguished every flickering ember of resentment and left behind a landscape of pure, crystalline clarity. It was as if I had been looking at a complex abstract painting my entire life, and in an instant, my perspective shifted, and I could see the hidden image with perfect, horrifying precision. I saw the 10-year-old me watching my father empty my pickle jar of its precious, hard-won coins for a gymnastics camp that was forgotten in a month. I saw the 17-year-old me scraping ice off the inside of my Honda's windshield while my sister's new Beetle sat warm and pristine in the garage. I saw the 20-year-old me calculating student loan interest rates in a sterile library cubicle while Olivia posted photos from her parent-funded trip to Florence. I saw the recent wire transfers, the digital bloodletting of my own security for her dresses, her venue, her invitations. These were not separate events. They were a single unbroken chain, and I was the one who had been forging my own shackles link by painful link. And with that clarity came the most devastating realization of all. It would never, ever be enough. If I gave them the $32,000, there would be another demand in a year. They would need a down payment for their own house, help with a car lease, a loan to fund Mark's next investment. I was not a daughter or a sister to them in that moment. I was a resource. I was a well they had been drawing from for 2 decades, and they had finally hit the bedrock of my future and were now asking for permission to start dynamiting the foundation. At that table, watching them wait for their answer, the desperate, lifelong craving for their approval simply died. It wasn't a violent death. It was a quiet, painless expiration. I saw that their approval was never a reward for my goodness or my responsibility. It was the currency they used to buy my silence and my compliance. It was a tool of control, and it only had power because I had assigned it value. In the silent, frozen space between their demand and my response, I finally understood that their validation was worthless. The only approval I needed was my own, and the only future that mattered was the one waiting for me and Liam behind a sage-green door on a quiet, tree-lined street. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, the cool glass a grounding sensation against my fingertips. I placed it back on the coaster with a soft, definitive click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. I looked directly at Olivia, meeting her expectant gaze without a flicker of doubt. "No," I said. The word was quiet, devoid of anger or argument. It was not a negotiation. It was a statement of fact, a closed door. For a split second, there was only stunned incomprehension. Olivia's smile froze, then faltered, as if she couldn't process the sound she'd just heard. My mother's expression of cheerful encouragement curdled into disbelief. It was Olivia who broke first. "What?" she asked, a sharp, brittle sound. "What did you just say?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice still calm, still level. "I'm not giving you our house deposit." The dam of their composure burst. "You can't be serious!" Olivia shrieked, her voice rising an octave and turning the heads of the people at the next table. "Chloe, this is my honeymoon, my once-in-a-lifetime trip." My mother's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "Chloe, what has gotten into you?" she hissed, leaning across the table. "This is your sister. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? With this selfishness?" Mark, who had been leaning back with such smug confidence, now sat bolt upright. "It's just money, Chloe," he said, his charming veneer cracking to reveal the cold, hard condescension beneath. "Don't be so dramatic. It's not like you can't make more." The accusations came in a frantic, overlapping torrent. I was jealous. I was spiteful. I was trying to ruin Olivia's perfect day because I couldn't stand to see her happy. I was ungrateful. I was selfish, selfish, selfish. The words that had once been my kryptonite, the labels I had spent my entire life trying to avoid, were now just noise. They washed over me, and for the first time, they found no purchase. Liam's hand, which had been resting on my thigh, moved to my back, a solid, unwavering presence. "We're done here," he said, his voice a low, firm counterpoint to their hysteria. He stood up, pulling my chair back for me. I rose with him, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. "I can't believe this," Olivia was saying, her eyes welling with furious tears. "You are ruining everything." My mother was pale with rage. "If you walk out that door, Chloe, don't even think about coming to the wedding." "That's fine," I said, the words coming easily, as if a great weight had been lifted from my chest. I looked at the three of them, my sister, my mother, her future husband, their faces distorted by a rage that was born of thwarted entitlement. They didn't look like family. They looked like strangers whose business deal had just fallen through. Without another word, Liam put a protective arm around my waist, and we walked away from the table, leaving them in the wreckage of their own outrageous expectations. The car ride home was a sanctuary of silence. Liam drove, one hand on the wheel and the other holding mine, his thumb drawing slow, steady circles on my skin. We didn't need to speak. The shared relief and the quiet trepidation for what was to come filled the space between us. We had just pulled into our apartment's parking garage when the first digital shot was fired. My phone lit up with a text from my mother. It was a single, chilling sentence. "I have never been more disappointed in you in my entire life." It was the opening salvo of a coordinated, relentless assault. For the next 48 hours, my phone ceased to be a communication device and became an instrument of psychological warfare. It buzzed and chimed with a furious, relentless energy, a constant stream of guilt, manipulation, and rage. Olivia's texts came in long, rambling paragraphs of pure, weaponized victimhood, punctuated by strings of crying emojis. "How could you do this to me? In front of everyone? You looked so cold, so heartless. I always knew you were jealous of me and Mark, but I never thought you'd go this far to ruin the happiest time of my life. This money means nothing to you, and it's everything to me. You've broken my heart." The voicemails she left were even worse. Recordings of her hysterical, gulping sobs, incoherent sentences about her ruined dreams and my cruelty. It was a performance, I knew, but a deeply unnerving one. My mother's messages were different. They were chiseled from ice and dipped in guilt. "Your father is so upset he can't even speak about this. You are tearing this family apart over money. Olivia is beside herself. You have a duty to your sister, and you have failed her in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. You have made your choice. Don't expect us to forget this." Then, the campaign widened. The next morning, I got a call from my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. Her voice was thick with a syrupy, second-hand concern. "Chloe, dear," she began, "your mother called me. She's just beside herself. I'm sure you didn't mean to upset everyone so badly. Olivia is just a mess. Perhaps you could reconsider? It's just a loan, after all, for a honeymoon. A house can wait, but memories like these are once in a lifetime." The narrative had been expertly spun and distributed. In their version of the story, I wasn't protecting my and Liam's life savings. I was a cruel, miserly dragon hoarding gold out of pure malice, determined to see my sister's fairy tale go up in flames. Friends of my parents, distant cousins, people I hadn't spoken to in years, were all being fed this twisted tale. Liam watched as I scrolled through the toxic waterfall of notifications, my shoulders tightening with every new message. It wasn't that I was tempted to give in. That door was closed and bolted, but the sheer venom of their attack was exhausting, a confirmation of how little they had ever truly seen me as a person with my own life and dreams. Late that night, As another tearful, rambling voicemail from Olivia began to play, Liam gently took the phone from my hand. His expression was calm but resolute. He held the power button until the screen went black, plunging the room into a blessed electronic silence. "Enough," he said softly. "You don't have to listen to this. We made our decision. Now we live with it. Together." With the phone silenced and the apartment wrapped in a quiet calm, the adrenaline of the confrontation began to recede, leaving a hollow, trembling exhaustion in its wake. I sank onto the sofa, the sheer toxicity of the past 2 days pressing down on me. Liam sat beside me, not crowding me, but creating a warm, solid presence I could lean into. He took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. "I am so proud of you," he said, his voice low and steady. "I know how hard that was. What you did back there, that took a kind of strength most people never have to find." I leaned my head on his shoulder, the last of my resolve crumbling into a few quiet, cleansing tears. It wasn't sadness for what I had lost, but relief for what I had finally protected. "I just can't believe how vicious they are," I whispered. "It's like they see our life savings as their personal emergency fund." Liam was quiet for a moment, then he squeezed my hand. "I can believe it," he said, his tone devoid of any "I told you so." "In fact, I counted on it. Do you remember that conversation we had back in March when we went for that long walk by the river?" I nodded, remembering the chilly spring afternoon. It was the weekend after Olivia had announced her engagement, and the pressure had already started to feel palpable. "I was so hesitant," I admitted. "When you first brought it up, a part of me was hurt." Liam had been gentle but firm that day, explaining his reasoning with the methodical calm of an engineer assessing a potential structural failure. "Chloe, this isn't about you and me," he'd said, stopping to look me in the eyes. "I have zero doubts about us. This is about them, your family. I see the way they operate. They don't respect your boundaries because, to them, you've never had any. And now, with this wedding, they're going to see your success and our savings not as something you've built, but as a resource they're entitled to. A prenup isn't about planning for a divorce. It's about legally defining what is ours together so no one else can lay a claim to it. Think of it as an insurance policy against emotional blackmail." He had specifically insisted on a clause that designated our joint savings account, the house fund, as a protected asset, explicitly tied to the purchase of a primary residence and indivisible for any other purpose, without the signed, notarized consent of both parties. At the time, it had felt like a cold, legalistic intrusion into our life. Now, sitting in the quiet of our apartment, I saw it for what it was, the ultimate act of protection. He hadn't just been my partner, he had been my advocate, my strategist, my shield. He had seen the storm coming long before I was willing to admit there were clouds in the sky and had calmly built us a shelter. "You knew," I said, a wave of profound gratitude washing over me. "You knew this exact thing was going to happen." "I knew some version of it would," he corrected gently. "And I knew we needed a better answer than just no. They don't respect your no, but they might just respect a legal document they can't argue with." In that moment, the dynamic shifted. We were no longer on the defensive, weathering a storm of their making. We were a team with a strategy, and we were holding an unassailable position. The next morning, I didn't wake up to a sense of dread. I woke up with a plan. While Liam made coffee, its rich aroma filling our small apartment with a sense of comforting normalcy, I sat at our small dining table and opened my laptop. The barrage of notifications from the night before had ceased, leaving a toxic digital silence in its wake. I knew it was only a temporary lull, the drawing of a deep breath before the next volley of guilt and recriminations, but I had no intention of engaging in that fight any longer. There would be no more emotional appeals, no justifications, no defending my character against their accusations of selfishness. I was a certified public accountant. I dealt in facts, figures, and binding agreements. It was time to move this conflict from their preferred battlefield of emotion to my own native ground of indisputable documentation. I opened a new email draft. The recipients were entered with clinical precision: Olivia, Mark, and my mother. The subject line was bland, professional, and unignorable. Regarding your financial request. The body of the email was brief, composed of 3 short, declarative sentences, each one stripped of any sentiment. It began by acknowledging their request for the $32,000. It then stated, plainly and without apology, that this would not be possible. The final sentence explained that my and Liam's joint assets are subject to a binding prenuptial agreement, and the funds in question are legally designated for a specific, pre-approved purpose. Then came the final, decisive action. I opened the scanned PDF of our signed and notarized prenup, a document that had once felt like an act of pessimism, but now revealed itself to be an act of profound foresight. I scrolled to Article 4, Section 2, Designation of Joint Real Estate Acquisition Fund. Using a simple markup tool, I drew a clean, professional-looking yellow box around the relevant clause. The one Liam had insisted upon, the one that explicitly stated the funds were to be used solely for the purchase of a primary residence and could not be gifted, loaned, or otherwise reallocated without the notarized written consent of both parties. I saved the single highlighted page as a new PDF titled Relevant Clause and attached it to the email. My finger hovered over the send button for only a second. There was no malice in the click, no triumphant surge of adrenaline. It wasn't a feeling of victory. It was a feeling of finality. I wasn't dropping a bomb to start a war. I was deploying a firewall to end one. I had refused to fight them on their terms, and instead had presented them with a set of terms, legally binding, signed, and irrefutable, that they could not possibly fight against. I closed the laptop with a quiet click. For 3 hours, the silence was absolute. I imagined the email landing, the confusion as they opened the attachment, the slow dawning realization of what it meant. The response, when it came, was not from Olivia or my mother, but from a number I didn't have saved. It was Mark. I put the phone on speaker, Liam moving to stand behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders. I answered with a simple, "Hello? What the hell is this?" The voice was unrecognizable. The smooth, charming baritone was gone, replaced by a low, guttural snarl that was thick with rage. "Are you serious, Chloe? A prenup? You got a prenup to protect your money from your own sister?" His fury was so raw and unrestrained it was shocking. It wasn't the wounded anger of a man whose fiancé had been denied her dream trip. It was the cold, calculating rage of a CEO whose merger had just been blocked by a surprise injunction. "It's a legal document, Mark," I said, my voice steady, bolstered by Liam's presence. "It outlines the legal status of our joint assets. As you can see, the house fund is a protected asset." "I don't give a damn what it is," he spat. "That is a significant financial asset that you have unilaterally taken off the table. We had plans. This wasn't just about some vacation. This was about setting a precedent, about family helping family. Did you even think about Olivia, or did you just think about yourself and how you could hoard every last penny?" In the background, I could hear Olivia start to cry, a thin, wailing sound. "Mark, stop!" "No, I won't stop!" he roared, clearly not speaking to me anymore. "Your sister just torpedoed our entire financial plan for the next 5 years. That money was supposed to be our safety net, our liquidity. She has 6 figures in the bank, and she puts up a legal wall to keep her own sister from having a decent start in life." The confession hung in the air, more damning than any accusation he could have leveled at me. Our financial plan, our safety net, liquidity. He hadn't just seen my $32,000 as a honeymoon fund. He had seen my entire net worth as a subsidiary of his and Olivia's future finances. He had looked at me, his future sister-in-law, and seen a long-term, low-interest line of credit with no repayment terms. The honeymoon wasn't the goal, it was the initial test withdrawal to see if the account was active. A text from my mother flashed across my screen while he was still ranting. "How dare you bring lawyers and contracts into this family? This is a disgusting betrayal." It was clear she was just as angry, but her fury was about the social contract I had broken. Mark's was about the financial one. The prenup was a bombshell, but not in the way I had anticipated. For Olivia and my mother, it was a cold, formal, and deeply insulting rejection. For Mark, it was something far worse. It was a closed door, a locked vault. It was the end of the negotiation, the death of a strategy, and the unraveling of a future he had already budgeted for. A future that was built not on his own success, but on mine. The fallout from Mark's enraged phone call was not a single explosion, but a series of seismic aftershocks that continued to fracture my family's landscape. The day after I sent the email, my mother sent a terse, one-line message announcing that the honeymoon to the Maldives was officially canceled. There was no explanation, no blame, just a cold, hard statement of fact, as if it were a weather report. But the real story trickled back to me a few days later, not from my immediate family, but from a cousin, Megan, who had always been more of a neutral observer. Megan called under the guise of checking in, but it wasn't long before she relayed what she had heard. The fight between Olivia and Mark after he hung up on me had been, in her words, apocalyptic. According to my aunt, who had received a tearful, hysterical call from Olivia in the middle of the night, Mark's mask of the charming, doting fiancé had not just slipped, it had been incinerated. The rage he'd shown me was nothing compared to the fury he unleashed on Olivia in the privacy of their apartment. He had apparently paced their living room, shouting about financial irresponsibility and a lack of foresight. He accused her of not having a handle on her family, of misrepresenting their assets, of failing to secure the investment that was supposed to launch their married life. The words he used were brutal and transactional. Assets, investment, secure. He wasn't talking about a sister helping another sister. He was talking about a failed acquisition. The argument had torn away the romantic facade of their relationship and exposed the cold, transactional framework beneath. Olivia, for the first time, was forced to see that Mark's love for her was inextricably linked to the financial comfort he believed her family, specifically me, could provide. He hadn't just wanted a beautiful bride. He'd wanted a bride with a built-in financial safety net. My prenup had not only cut off the flow of funds, but it had also revealed the truth of her fiancé's motivations in the harshest possible light. The canceled honeymoon became a symbol of this broken promise. It wasn't just a trip they could no longer afford. It was a future that was no longer guaranteed. The financial strain was the first real stress test of their relationship, and it was immediately clear that their foundation was not built on love or partnership, but on a shared sense of entitlement and a business plan that had just been declared bankrupt. The cracks that appeared were not small fissures. They were deep structural fractures, and the entire glittering edifice of their perfect life was beginning to groan under the weight of a reality they had never planned for. While Olivia's world imploded under the weight of canceled plans and ugly truths, ours was quietly, solidly taking shape. The weeks following the email were blessedly silent. My family, caught in their own vortex of drama, left me completely alone. Liam and I used that peace to navigate the final, meticulous steps of buying our house. We submitted bank statements, signed mountains of paperwork, and methodically checked off every item on the closing checklist. Each signature felt like a quiet act of defiance, a reaffirmation of the life we were choosing to build, far from the noise and demands of my family. The day of the closing was overcast and gray, but for us, It felt like the brightest day of the year. We sat in a sterile, impersonal lawyer's office, a place of contracts and consequences, and signed the last of the documents. The lawyer, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, slid a small, plain manila envelope across the polished mahogany table. Inside were two newly cut brass keys. They felt heavy and substantial in my palm, nothing like the flimsy keys to our apartment. These were keys to a foundation, to a future, to a fortress of our own making. We drove straight to the house. It was empty and silent, smelling of fresh paint and old solid wood. We stood on the porch for a long moment, not speaking, just looking at the sturdy oak door. I took one of the keys, the cool metal a stark contrast to the warmth of Liam's hand in mine, and slid it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, definitive click. The sound echoed in the quiet street, a sound of finality and beginning all at once. Pushing the door open, we stepped across the threshold together. The late afternoon light, muted by the clouds, streamed through the bare windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The house was just an empty shell of rooms, but it was ours, every square foot of it. I ran my hand along the smooth, cool plaster of the living room wall. This was it. This was the tangible result of every 60-hour workweek, every skipped vacation, every disciplined choice. This was the house that my $32,000 had bought. It wasn't a fleeting, week-long luxury in the Maldives. It was shelter. It was security. It was the beginning of our real life. Standing there with Liam in the quiet, echoing rooms, a profound sense of peace settled over me. There was no gloating, no sense of revenge. It was a victory, but a quiet one. It was the deep, unshakable vindication that comes not from proving others wrong, but from proving yourself right. We hadn't just bought a house, we had bought our freedom. The first few weeks in the new house were a blissful blur of productive chaos. We spent our evenings and weekends covered in paint, pulling up old carpets, and debating the merits of different shades of white. It was exhausting, satisfying work, the very opposite of the destructive drama that had consumed the previous months. I was on a stepladder in the dining room, carefully cutting in the trim around a window, when my phone, resting on the dusty floor, buzzed with a call from Megan. I almost ignored it, but a sense of curiosity won out. I climbed down, wiped my hands on a rag, and answered. "So, you're not going to believe the latest on the wedding of the century," Megan said, skipping any real preamble. Her tone was a mixture of gossip and genuine astonishment. "They're not having it at the Elmwood Mansion anymore. They canceled the booking." I was silent for a moment, processing. "Did they lose the deposit?" I asked, a question that was more for my own mental accounting than anything else. "Oh yeah," Megan confirmed. "All 10 grand. Gone." Apparently, Mark's short-term investment never matured, or whatever excuse he was using. "They're having the wedding in your parents' backyard now." The image was so jarring, so far removed from the opulent vision Olivia had sold to everyone, that I almost laughed. The grand mansion replaced by a patch of suburban lawn. But Megan wasn't finished. It turned out the honeymoon had just been the first crack in Mark's glittering facade. When it became clear no more money was coming from me, other financial promises he'd made began to evaporate as well. The 7-piece band was replaced by a DJ. The gourmet caterer was swapped for a local restaurant doing a buffet. The guest list was slashed from 200 to a mere 50, a cut so brutal it was a social massacre. The reason was simple and ugly. Mark was not the wealthy financier he pretended to be. His wealth management job was a commission-based sales role, and he was drowning in debt from maintaining the illusion of success. The fancy watch, the leased luxury car, the designer clothes. He had been counting on a significant infusion of cash from my family, via me, to not only fund the wedding but to stabilize his own precarious finances. He hadn't just wanted a honeymoon, he'd needed a bailout. Olivia was now trapped. She had broadcast her fairy tale wedding to the world, and now she was left to preside over its deeply downsized, humiliating remnant. She was tethered to a man who had not only failed to deliver the promised lifestyle, but had revealed himself to be a liar and a leech, his affection contingent on a financial windfall she could no longer provide. She was left to face the consequences, not just of her entitlement, but of her choice in a partner who was a mirror of her own values. After I hung up with Megan, I looked around at the paint-spattered drop cloths and the half-finished walls of our dining room. There was no surge of triumphant joy, no satisfying taste of revenge. There was only a profound and quiet sense of sorrow for the sister I once had, and an overwhelming gratitude for the life I had chosen. I had escaped a house built on sand, and standing here, in my solid, imperfect, and entirely real home, I had never felt more secure. 6 months after we moved in, our house had transformed from an empty shell into a home. Bookshelves. Liam built himself lined the living room walls. The garden was starting to flourish under his patient care, and the small, sunny room off the kitchen had become my favorite spot to drink coffee on a Saturday morning. The house was filled with the quiet, comfortable rhythm of our life together. The wedding had happened, a subdued and reportedly tense affair in my parents' backyard. I hadn't attended. I sent a polite, impersonal card and a modest gift from their registry, a gesture that felt more like a formal closing of an old account than a celebratory offering. Liam and I spent that weekend hiking in the mountains, the silence of the forest a welcome balm. My contact with my family had dwindled to a near-complete stop. Olivia had unfriended me on all social media, a digital excommunication that felt more like a relief than a punishment. My father sent the occasional awkward text asking how the house was, but never mentioning the schism that had fractured our family. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my mother called. I stared at her name on the screen, a knot tightening in my stomach. I let it go to voicemail, a boundary I would never have dared to erect a year ago. The message she left was tentative, stripped of its usual manipulative edge. "Chloe, honey, it's me. I was just thinking about you. That little house of yours must be looking so nice now that the leaves are changing. Maybe I could come by sometime? See it?" There was no real apology in her words, no acknowledgement of the pain and pressure she had inflicted. It was an attempt to smooth things over, to pretend the chasm between us was just a small crack that could be easily papered over. The old me would have leaped at the chance. The old me would have heard the slight tremor in her voice and mistaken it for remorse, desperate for any scrap of reconciliation. But the woman sitting in her own sun-drenched kitchen, in a house she had fought for, was different. I called her back a few hours later, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice polite but not warm. "Thanks for the call. We're not really having visitors just yet. We're still settling in. But I appreciate you thinking of us." It was a gentle but unmistakable no. A boundary clearly and calmly stated, without excuse or justification. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with surprise. She wasn't used to being denied access. "Oh," she said finally, her voice small. "Okay, honey. Well, you know where to find me." We hung up a few moments later, and I felt a profound shift. The power dynamic that had governed my entire life, her needs, her wants, her approval as the central axis of my world, was irrevocably broken. I hadn't slammed a door in her face. I had simply locked my own, and I was holding the only key. The path forward was uncertain, but for the first time, I knew it would be one of my own making.